And as I mentioned before, kind of like the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes of what I want to get into is the home initiative, which is very much kind of at the forefront of the news cycle here in Austin and a big development. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit into some of the historical precedent and kind of how we got here.
You bet.
So where is the good starting spot? I mean, you can go back forever, right? I know, 1929, 21 was one of the land code rights, but where is kind of a good starting spot?
What if we went just maybe a little bit further back?
Okay.
6,000 years.
Okay.
The birth of cities. In cities, really, I mean, the land value and the needs of the city and the needs of the community, that's what dictated what got built and where, and density and use. And then came along zoning in 1915 in the United States.
Okay.
And you can look back to why zoning came along and who zoning was targeting. And folks weren't shy about who they were targeting back in the day. And so zoning was created. Zoning went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court eventually ruled with the Chief Justice saying something along the lines of apartments are parasites to our cities.
Okay.
And so here we are, 100 years later, and clearly in a gigantic affordability crisis. And so much of that has just been the result of us making housing illegal to build in far too many places.
And so you said they're not shy about who they're zoning against. Say it bluntly here. Like, what are we talking about?
Sure. So in 1916, when they first brought in zoning, for Berkeley, California, it was Chinese laundromats. And then for New York City, it was Eastern European Jews. And folks were, living their lives and creating businesses. And then other folks had issues with certain people in their communities. And those were the main folks, the first folks kind of spelled out in kind of old meeting minutes. Nolan Gray does a great job in Arbitrary Lines of kind of finding these old historical documents and being like, wow, here they are. But then, of course, there were racial deed restrictions where Austin's not unique, but roughly 50% of Austin was covered in two forms of racial deed restrictions. One, you can't live here if you're a person of color. The other, you can only live here with Caucasian blood, same darn thing, right? And then for the areas where we didn't have racial deed restrictions, you had the red lining and yellow lining, and just insurance companies were able to say, okay, this place is high risk. And so a hailstorm comes through, our homes are on other sides of this line right here, this arbitrary line. And for some reason, one of us is red line, the other is not. The bank can say, well, we're just not going to lend to you. It's high risk. Or they can give you a usury rate and just charge you way too much.
Right.
So yeah, it's had bad effects for decades.
Sure. Are there what's the argument for them, right? So, or for zoning, right? So, obviously it was used nefariously in its historical beginnings, but what's the basic high level argument for zoning?
We can talk about nuisances. So if you want to talk about, regulating nuisances. So do you want a smelting plant next to an elementary school? Probably not.
Right.
Do you want a gas station right next to your home? Probably not.
Right.
And so there's things that we could look at that make sense in allowing a city to be a city. But to say that this type of housing is not compatible with this type of housing, typically the triggering property that says you're not compatible to be near me is very expensive property. It's like a large lot, single family zoned home. And it's only going to be affordable to 5 to 10% of the population. And what it does is it makes the next door development that was going to be affordable to a much broader range of income earners, it makes that entire product less affordable because they can build fewer homes and they're restricted in what they're allowed to build. And there's a reason why Travis County is losing population and the city of Austin is only gaining 9% of the new housing growth of the entire metro, per our demographer recently sharing that with city council. And that's just devastating because what that means is we're sprawling.
Right. And that's interesting because that kind of goes against the narrative that Austin is booming, right? So and I think we may be like referring to the same article. I think there was an Austin Business Journal article that took those, the demographer's finding and kind of summarized them. And the Austin metro was found to be the second fastest growing metro in the country for 12 years in a row. It was the fastest growing. But like you just said, in Travis County and in Central, those net negative. Is that right?
Just came out in Travis County,
right?
2,500 folks,
which would I think blow a lot of people's mind, and a lot of that reason is because of affordability, right? In the core, and all that growth is turning into sprawl, right? And sprawl meaning the suburbs are booming and geographically recovering a larger area, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, you asked how we get here. Let's come back to more recent times. So Austin updated its land development code in 1984, had one speaker, is what I'm told. One speaker came out to speak, hey, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it was more of a downzoning. So imagine being able to build a lot of housing, capacity of housing. So you have your built, the homes that have been built in your community, and then you have your capacity for building this many more homes.
Okay.
And as that capacity shrinks, the land value goes up because you can build in fewer places. And so in 1984, big downzoning, a lot of places where you used to be able to build triplexes and fourplexes, that was all brought down to you can now build 1 or 2 homes. Even a little bit before that, in 1930s, when we finally did away with racial covenants at the federal level, Austin that same year upped its minimum lot size from 3,000 square feet to 5,750 square feet. So what I like to share is, like, if you're wearing a gold ring, imagine if you were required to suddenly have 80% more gold in that ring. Is that going to lower the cost, make the cost the same, or increase the cost?
Right.
It's going to increase the cost.
Sure.
And the folks who did that and increased the minimum lot size, they knew what they were doing. They had the same kind of nefarious ideas that these racial deed restrictions had. And now City Council, many years later, is finally looking to address a lot of these things. In 2012, we adopted, as a city, Imagine Austin, which is your comprehensive vision of a city. It's what do we care about? Education, the environment, transportation, access to fresh foods, and all those important things. And housing was a big part of that. And we said we want to adopt a new land development code to promote a compact and connected city. And so we spent 8 years as a community working on that. Lots of resources, had outside expertise come in. We passed it on first reading. We passed it on second reading. Council was 10 days away from passing it on third and final reading, and a small group of homeowners sued and unfortunately overturned that in the courts. So then council said, okay, let's try again, because obviously housing is still an issue. It's an even bigger issue. We know what housing has done since 2020. It's only gotten way more expensive. And so then they started to work on different zoning categories, like vertical mixed use 2, relaxing compatibility, which is this horrible rule that costs us a tremendous amount of housing, and legalizing residential and commercial. And those things, as well as affordability unlocked, were all challenged in the courts again. And a different judge just completely overturned the democratic process, throwing all those things out. Thankfully, affordability unlocked didn't get thrown out, but all those other items did. And so now council is just continuing to work on things. Home is one of those items,
right,
of a list of items they're all working on, but we need a lot more progress when it comes to legalizing housing in Austin, Texas.